We are rolling. It is draft week, and the Kansas City Chiefs are about to be on the clock in a number of different ways. Their board is set. So is mine. We're going to break it down today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome to Locked On Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which means it's your team every day, everywhere, starting on YouTube and now to every audio platform you can find. Like, sub, and hit the bell on YouTube if you would. You get to see this. And today is very much a visual day because you want to see the draft board. It's the one that I've put together. I do it every year based on all the data that comes in and all the reviews. We're going to go through it. Chris is going to get drop some bombs on it and see if it'll hold up. I hope I put together a good board this year. We'll see. Lot to go over there, but there's also a bit of news we're going to cover as well because this is the Chief show that you want to be on. I'm Ryan Tracy, the founder of Rogue Analytics and Performance Consulting, home of the Athletic Matrix and the RAPC Draft Guide. You can get that right now at rogueapc.com. But if you do, use that code MatrixLOC because it'll get you a nice discount. And the guide itself, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
the board itself, the board itself you can go get on NFL33.com. That one's unlocked and for free. It's the top post right there. And if you need even more, we'll break down film and everything at RGR Football.
And I'm Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner, and I do want to say really quick, I'm not going to announce all of it right now, but I do have a new business I'm starting, just started today. There will be more information coming on that very shortly, but be looking for that in the future. Lots to talk about there. But I want to argue with you just a little bit before we even get to the news. I just like it because it feels like this is almost draft day. And say what you want, and I know people hate it. I absolutely love that movie. It gets me in the mood every year it gets me ready for the draft every year. Watched it already, probably going to watch it again. But it really does feel like it's almost draft day at this point. Obviously, it's just a couple days away at this point. But you can almost feel the tension right now.
So let's have a bit of fun then, since you bring it up. Because I don't really like pancakes that much, but if you're putting us in roles, who do I have to? Am I Dennis Leary in that movie?
Oh, man, if I'm Kevin Costner, yeah, I would think you'd have to be Dennis Leary.
I can live with that. Run the damn ball. Let's go. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually really fits you. So, I mean, to be fair, that really fits you.
Yeah, hey, sometimes. Running the ball is the topic of the day as well. We are going to get to the board here pretty quick, but some news dropping here as we get ready to record about supposed interest from the Kansas City Chiefs in a first-round running back, a guy that I have very high on my board. We'll talk about where he is, but it's not the name that you're thinking of. Everybody in the world wants Bijan Robinson because he's the most well-rounded back, the most fully formed pro-ready guy in this draft. But there's just a glaring similarity for another prospect in this draft. It happens to be my RB2 that just, I think it's a little too easy. I think it's smoke that Jahmyr Gibbs might be on the Chiefs' radar in the first round because it's just too glaring a comparison to a guy that used to be in this city before. I want to know your thoughts. How does Jahmyr Gibbs, in your opinion, compare to Jamal Charles? It's just too much.
That's a huge comparison, and I think that is troubling I don't even want to touch on it, to be completely honest. When I first read that report, I kind of got pissed, if I'm going to be completely clear and honest about it, because say what you want about draft nicks and say what you want about media, but Peter King was one of the first guys that announced Kansas City was going to be going after Mahomes. There was no real smoke. There was no real fire. They brought him in for a visit, but, there wasn't much made of it. But he was one of the first guys to come out and say Kansas City's trying to make a move to get up the board, and then it came out that it was Mahomes. He knows things about the Chiefs because he's connected in that organization. So when he says something, I tend to listen, and especially when it comes to Kansas City. And maybe this is just smoke before the draft. I'd be kind of pissed if they traded up to go get a running back of all positions because I think they have bigger needs. But as it is with all draft picks, when you look at what happened with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, when you start looking at going up and trading for a running back, it's got to be somebody that can be a perennial all-pro on a regular basis. I mean, you can't just get a guy that is going to be a starter. You have to get a perennial all-pro. And quite frankly, it doesn't make sense because of Pacheco as well.
I can't argue with you on any of those points. I will say this, Jameer and Jamal, and yes, guys, I will probably mix up their vowel pronunciations here over the next 15 minutes. But Jameer and Jamal, they do have striking similarities. Jamal Charles is my comp for Jahmyr Gibbs. So I can understand the connection there. The question becomes for me is whether it's Peter King or whether it's Albert Breer, is this bona fide? Is this, hey, it's just too easy to make this comparison? I wonder, because I would hope that the organization has learned their lesson from the Clyde Edwards-Helaire draft selection and understanding that you have needs at 3 other significant positions. If they were to do this, they would have to have a clear and concrete vision of exactly as you said, that he has the ability to be an all-pro because you've gotten the investment back. You've proven to yourself that you can get production from a 7th-round pick. You can do anything on day 3. I'm not saying you can't take a 4th-rounder, but to take a 1st-round pick in this selection, in this draft, I think is missing the mark in ways that I don't think we're really prepared to deal with.
Well, and the question I would have is can he fill in any other position? Can he go out and can he be a wide receiver at times? Can he do that type of role? No, and I understand he can. I'm just saying that makes it a little bit more palatable if he's able to do those types of things because it gives you another weapon that you can kind of move in and out of the offense. And I also do think that this could be an evolution of what Reed is wanting to do and maybe what Matt Nagy, who I think is the head coach on waiting, is wanting to do. Because if you look at the offensive line, I think they're going to be able to run the ball better than they have in the past. And I'm not saying that they're going to try to make Patrick throw less, but if you have a very, very dominant type running game between Pacheco and Gibbs, I could see how that could make this offense extremely hard to stop, period.
Well, the only thing that I can say this, and everyone listening, if you for somehow just found us today, my name's Ryan Tracy, and I like the run game. No one will be surprised about that if you've ever listened before. And for a guy who does want to emphasize and bring back the run game, at least in some fashion, I'm not saying it has to be a 50-50 split or anything like that. But for a guy who does purport that, and I do feel that way, I do also feel that the running game is more important than the running back, because I think you can find talent at that position at any level. And so that's, I think the disparity for me is putting your eggs in that basket in the 1st round. I think it is still something that I wouldn't do. And I might be the biggest proponent of the run game in all of Kansas City. So
no, I think that's a fair point.
It just makes it difficult. And I will say this, if it were to happen, it will be because he has the ability to go outside and split out. And it will be because he has the home run hitting ability that reminds you of Jamal Charles. So I can understand that. But it also says, and this might be the key here, it also syncs with what they're doing at the offensive line position. Juwan Taylor is a wide zone tackle. He can do that in his sleep, and it's going away from the power-oriented thing. And I do think that plays into Gibbs' hands as well. So if it were to happen, I will still be probably disappointed a little bit just in terms of value, but it will make sense.
The one thing I got to say that we haven't talked about, and we were wanting to start talking about your board before the second break, that's not going to happen at this point. But I will say this. The one that really makes me scratch my head even more than Gibbs is the talk about Osiris Swords. Is that,
yeah.
I say that?
Yep.
The guard. Yeah.
Big guard from Florida. 2nd on my board. I see not only Peter Skoronski is the best offensive lineman in this class, I do have him as a guard. So Osiris is the 3rd guard on my board. Steve Avila is above him. And I do believe that pass set wise, outside zone wise, I think Steve Avila is a little bit more adept in fitting in that scheme. Torrance is powerful, and I do think he can run gap very, very well. He also can play in all schemes. I just like Avila a little bit better. But again, another position in the 1st round, being a guard, I find that far-fetched.
Yeah, and especially if you're going to continue to have Tooney on this roster, unless you're thinking you're going to cut Tooney right after the draft, this move does not make any sense. And I'm not advocating for that. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying they need to cut Tooney. I'm just saying that this does not make sense for a move for them. And I get that he's a fringe 1st-round prospect in some people's eyes, which it would make sense if they stayed at 31. But guard just still doesn't make sense because it's not a need. If it was a need, okay. And yeah, it could be a need in 2024, but I don't think it's a need in 2023. And I don't think you take a 1st-round pick, especially at that position that's not going to basically be playing all season.
Yeah, I have to agree. And they've had some other visits lately that do fit the mold. So I think this is smoke. I wouldn't agree with either of these selections.
Quick question. Does he have the ability to play right tackle?
I want to say that he's taken tackle snaps. I would have to go look him up, which I can do here shortly, but I don't know that you're going to feel super comfortable with that either way. Just from his film, I don't think that I would do that. Chiefs may feel differently.
Well, that would be the only thing that would really kind of make sense to me in this scenario.
Okay. Well,
so
you're thinking that he could be a multi-position player?
Yeah, potentially. I'm not suggesting that they go and get this guy, but we're just talking about what is being talked about today, coming out from Albert Breer and Peter King. So when we get back, we're going to go into Ryan's board. We'll talk a little bit more about Gibbs. We'll talk a little bit more about Osiris as well. But here is a word from our sponsors.
By the way, Osiris is a right guard. I went back 3 years of snaps, and that is the absolute case. And I may have bet on that if I was feeling kind of squirrely a minute ago, but I wasn't quite there. But now I think I would. I would definitely look at baseball because right now, grand slams, no hitters, double plays, they're all back on the field right now. And you can get into the action and get to the place where the MLB action lives. It's at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And then right now, they're still giving new customers a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 if your first bet doesn't pay out. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up. When you place your first bet, you can get up to $1,000 in bonus bets if that doesn't win. Super simple. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet for up to $1,000 in bonus bets right now at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up today. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the MLB, the NBA, and the NFL. Okay, so we covered a couple of guys there. Osiris is a traditional right guard. I don't think either of us would like either of those picks. So that said, where he exists on the board is right here in the middle of top of the middle tier of the second round. On my board, you guys can get this for free at NFL33.com. You can also sign up and become a subscriber for all of our behind the paywall content as well. All of our true takes on all these prospects. You can check that out as well. But the way I do the board is I break the first and second rounds into tiers in chunks of top 10, middle 12, bottom 10. And you can see he's right at the top of that middle section for me is Osiris Torrance. Steve Avila is right at the top of the second round, and Peter Skoronski is at the top of the middle tier of the first round. I still think he has a chance to go off the board first, but we'll find out with the offensive lineman. What stands out to you, and what do you want to? What do you have some quibbles with?
Interestingly enough, I actually also saw somebody say that everybody thinks Paris Johnson could go top 10. So I'll be interested to see how that turns out. I started looking at this board. I think it's interesting. You have DeJuan Jones all the way at the bottom of your second round tier. That is interesting to me. Darnell Wright is at the bottom of your first round, which I think makes sense. But there's possibility if they think that he could be. The NFL is becoming so different than what it was 10, 15 years ago, where left tackle was the dominant tackle position. You had to have somebody good there. Right tackle didn't matter as much. You wanted a mauler. That's not the case anymore. No. You've got so many pass rushers. You need a good guy on both sides. If they feel like Darnell Wright, and I'm not just talking about the Chiefs, I'm talking about the NFL in general. If they think he can be a perennial Pro Bowler every single year and perennial possible All-Pro, maybe he is a guy that goes early in the first round or a lot earlier than we expected, even though it is right tackle, not versus left. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with your designation there. I don't think right versus left is as meaningful as it used to be. And this, by the way, folks, is my board based on my evaluations and what I would do. Where am I comfortable taking a prospect? DeJuan Jones is very much like Orlando Brown. Super long, super big, not the best feet. He belongs in a specific offense, in my opinion. That is like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Cincinnati. I would not be surprised for Cincinnati to grab him to put with Orlando Brown because they're mirror images of each other. For me, I don't want that.
Sorry, go ahead.
For me, I want the athlete, much like the Jawan Taylors, and that's who's prioritized on this board.
Yeah, which is also why Orlando Brown fits Cincinnati better than he fits Kansas City. Mm-hmm. They don't mind having that guy that it doesn't have the feet that can get around. So I think that makes a lot of sense. The other interesting thing we didn't touch about on this, but it did sound like Kansas City, there's actually legitimate interest possibly in Zay Flowers. Maybe they'll move up and go get Zay Flowers. So that's a possibility as well.
Now, Zay's an interesting one. We've talked about
Zay Flowers a lot. So I think we needed to touch on Gibbs and and the Osiris Torrance, because that's just out of left field to me.
Sure. And I'm trying to zoom in, folks, for you on YouTube so you can get a good look at it. I have Zay and Quentin Johnson in the second round. We keep hearing more and more that more teams are less enamored with the wide receiver group than I am. My final board has Jordan Addison number 2. He was number 1 all the way up until about March. And the confirmation of the speed being right about the same for JSN and Jordan Addison changed that. Zay Flowers is a size issue, and I think it's a role issue. I do think Quentin Johnson has a long way to go, and both JSN and Jordan Addison are better, more well-rounded, and more capable pro receivers right now, and that's why they are where they are. But the interesting thing for me is below Zay.
Yeah, but to be clear, though, on both Johnston and on Flowers, if you pick them in the low 20s or in the 30s like you are, that's not, we've said this many times, that's not a horrible selection. Obviously, you have Johnson as being a top of the second round type guy, so that means that bottom of the first round really makes a lot of sense. Zay Flowers is pretty close there, it looks like. So in the same breath, I mean, in a sense, and this is the other thing I've been reading this week and looking at in a lot of different ways, there's a lot of teams that seem like, from what media is saying, think that there's only maybe 15 players that have first round grades in this class. Yeah. And that the top of the first round is very, very thin. So you could see situations where, and that actually could play in Kansas City's favor. Mm-hmm. If they like one of those guys and they want to pay to go get one of those guys, if somebody else doesn't like them, maybe they have the ability to get up for less than what it would normally take because they don't want to draft, the other team doesn't want to draft somebody in the first round that they don't have a first round or second round grade on.
Agreed. And I was feeling a little bit, generous here. I ended up with 19 first round grades. I could easily bump Brian Branch into the top of the second. And I did pull Bijan into the top of the second just because I won't take a first round running back. That's what a reflection on me, not on Bijan. He is still the best back in here. And in terms of absolute football player, he's a top 10 talent. I just can't justify the cost and the risk. That's okay. So what I do want to point out here, though, is beyond Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnson, I do think this group right here in the third round, the tail end of second in through the third round is going to be the sweet spot. Overall, I have 42 second round grades and 38 third round grades. Interestingly enough, it does go back up 41 fourth rounders by my system. And I am pretty comfortable with that. But for this group, Jalen Hyatt, I think I love Rashee Rice, and he's shown that he can do a lot of things. He just doesn't do it consistently. Whereas Jalen Hyatt can do one thing really consistently, and he's going to give you that deep threat. Tillman, Perry, Downs, they're in order for me based on the way that I think they can fit into an offense and bring something to it. Mingo's really close to them. He was just above Josh Downs until late in the process as well. And then you have Mims and Reed. Tyler Scott, somebody we don't talk enough about, but I do think that he is a legitimate wide receiver option.
Yeah, and I think I've seen Kansas City possibly be interested in him, and not necessarily bringing him in for a visit, but maybe talking to him at a pro day or talking to him at the combine. But I really wanted to go after Jonathan Mingo in the last mock draft. It wasn't able to get it done. I got A.T. Perry instead, which obviously, as you're sitting here showing us this, you have A.T. Perry above Mingo. Mm-hmm. Teams obviously are going to have them in different places. But the other thing that really is going to be interesting in my mind is Mingo and like Johnston. I think there's a ton of you have the ability to say, okay, this guy could be something special because of this trait, but he still struggles. He's going to need to be developed. I think Mingo is close to that, but he's not on the same level. But you would have to take Johnston in the first. Maybe you could get Mingo in the third. Mm-hmm. Is there the ability to do something like that and get a guy in the third that is going to be very close to that guy that you were going to maybe have to trade up and go get? Because I'm not so sure Johnston is still there at 31.
Could be. Like you said, with that few, if teams really have only 15 grades, there's 16 teams that could have to be making a selection that they don't agree with and they can't trade out of. And unfortunately, that could be something that happens to the Kansas City Chiefs as well.
Could be more teams, to be quite honest, if they have different players. It's going to be interesting. I think that this draft, and the fun part is everything I keep reading, everything that keeps coming out from media, and I know it's a lot of smoke and mirrors this time of year, but I do really believe that this is probably true. With a draft that they don't feel is top heavy, And what you're showing on your board specifically is you have almost 40 guys in every round for the next 3 rounds after the first round.
Yep.
That means having those second, third, and fourth round picks are going to be extremely valuable because you can get talents that are worth that value versus getting a guy in the first round. So is somebody that's going to be picking at 17 and 18 thinking, oh, well, maybe we can trade back and get an extra third, and that'll put us in a position or an extra third and a fourth, and that'll put us in a position where we can go get 2 guys that we really feel comfortable with at that position versus a first round pick. I'm looking at you, Detroit. Specifically, that's who I used last night. But it goes back to what we talked about. If there's only 15 players in this first round for most teams, I do think that you could see a lot of trades at the back end of the first round, and teams always take players that no other team is really going to take. The Raiders have done it multiple times. We've seen it from multiple different teams. So it's also possible that you're still sitting there at 17 and 18 with most of your 15 gone, but maybe 1 or 2 left.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And the nice thing for the Chiefs is if they do want to move up, there should be a number of teams looking to move out. Does that drive the price down? Can they do that more affordably? And that's the exciting part. So as much as I can say, yes, the way this stacks out, there's more value later that they can go back for. They can certainly move up, I think, cheaper than maybe the last couple of years.
And that was another thing I've been seeing is that there's a lot of people that have been saying Beach has been calling to look into trading up. They're one of the few teams that seem to be looking to trade up, which makes a ton of sense for Kansas City's needs and makes a ton of sense for Brett Veach in general.
Yeah. I mean, when everybody's zigging, why don't you zag?
Yep. Attack the draft as he always wants to. But when we get back, we have a lot more to talk about this draft board.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp to give you an edge on learning about yourself and getting everything that you need to make yourself better and get through the next hurdle a little bit easier. It's a lifelong process, and we all have to go through it. And BetterHelp is there to make it easier for you. If you're thinking about starting therapy, let me tell you, give BetterHelp a try because it's entirely online. It sets you up to not have it take over your life, but become part of your life and part of your process. You can get just about anything done. It's convenient, it's flexible, and it's suited to your schedule. They'll give you a brief questionnaire, get you matched up with a licensed therapist that matches what you're looking for. Maybe it's a specialty, maybe it's just personality. We'll see how that comes together. If you don't get along or you don't feel comfortable, you can switch therapists at any time at no charge whatsoever. This is not a single path. This is getting the best for you in your process. You can discover your potential with BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon right now. And you get 10% off your first month right now. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. Go check it out. All right. So you got issues with anything? You got questions that you're like, you might be correct, Ryan?
I just think it's crazy. The tight end class seems to be all over the board, quite frankly. Everybody seems to have a different opinion. I mean, everything I've read says that this is one of the deepest tight end drafts in years, but everybody has everybody all over the board. I mean, some people have Darnell Washington is possibly sneaking into the first round. Right. You have him as a third round pick. I've seen that Kansas City could be, or maybe not Kansas City. I've seen that other people could be interested in maybe Sam Laporta instead of Darnell Washington earlier on. There's a lot of different questions about the tight end class. I think that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out overall. But you start looking at your board, and I do find it interesting, and I didn't notice this until just now. You have Tyree Wilson under Myles Murphy and Nolan Smith.
I do. And I'm glad you brought him up or one of the other guys. For those of you that are on YouTube or those of you that have downloaded the board already, the red dots are used in most systems around the NFL. A red dot means that there's a significant injury question or they haven't been involved in the draft process. Tyree Wilson has done absolutely zero in this draft process other than take interviews. He hasn't been able to test. He hasn't been able to perform. There was no combine. There's no anything. And I think that is a risk. So I've dropped him down below guys that I know are ready to go, even though Nolan Smith is coming off of a pec issue. And Myles Murphy wasn't able to work out until very late in the process. They're both farther along than Tyree Wilson is. And I think that bothers me a little bit, paired with the fact that Tyree Wilson is an elite physical specimen, both size and length, and his ability to get off the ball. I wish he was a little more twitchy, but he comes off the ball well. He fits Steve Spagnuolo. He's a perfect fit. So maybe I'm saying, hey, there's some question marks. Maybe he should be down the bottom where the Chiefs could reach him. I could be wrong, but if it worked out that way, I think a 31st pick is well worth the risk here. But I don't want to lay off on the significant risk that is injury. And there are a number of guys in this class. Dalton Kincaid's in the same situation. Hendon Hooker is in the same situation. I do have him as a first-round pick. He's been number 3 on my board for about 6 months, and I feel better and better about it as other sources are coming out and agreeing with me. Same thing with Mozzie Smith, Andrew Voorhees. These are significant players that have significant injury issue. There are a couple other players that I do want to point out as well that have maybe a little bit less so, like DeJuan Jones, who opted out of a lot of testing and opted out of day 2 and 3 of the Senior Bowl. That's what the asterisks on this board mean, is that we don't know of an injury, but he hasn't participated in the full process to get to this draft by choice. And I like to highlight that as well.
Yeah, and I was going to point out Smith. I think that's a good call out on your part. I do think it's interesting. A lot of mock drafts I've seen has had Kalijah Kancey in the first round.
Yes.
You have him as a low second round pick. But I think the most interesting thing to me about him is it's been reported by multiple different sources. He took no top 30 visits at all.
Agreed. A couple of reasons for that. He's an elite at his position athlete, and his film is very straightforward. He busts gaps, he attacks, he's great at providing pressure, but he is significantly undersized. And so I think teams haven't had to really go to the 30 visit aspect of it because I think they got what they want on film. They saw the testing. I think most of them had come to a decision prior based on his film. And I just feel that, again, this is me protecting the floor of a prospect rather than going for the ceiling. He could be the next Aaron Donald. Too many people make that connection because of the uniform that they both wore. I am trying to make sure that I don't get caught up in that. And I'm trying to project the ceiling here, especially in a group that there are a lot in the defensive interior and the defensive edge that are significant projections, including Tyree Wilson, including guys like Lucas Van Ness, who's never started a ball game at Iowa. There are a number of guys that are more projection than normal. You can see Tommy Adewale, who I really do like for Kansas City, is down in the 3rd round for the same exact reason. He was a 4th round prospect coming off the season. It wasn't until testing and the Senior Bowl that he started to rise. And I think at the end of the day, we have to take that for what it's worth, but we can't overvalue that. And particularly in the defensive line group this year, I'm trying to stay true to the floors rather than the ceilings.
Yeah, and the interesting thing in my mind when it comes to Kancey is if nobody's taking top 30 visits, maybe they've already made up their minds on him. Is he going to be somebody that they're going to go out and get in the first round? Because I've seen a ton of mock drafts where he's a first-round talent, and I'm not arguing with you having him in the bottom of the second. All I'm saying is if they think he's going to be a first-round talent, that doesn't make sense that you're not going to have a top 30 visit. I think you'd still want to have that kind of dialogue with a player. I mean, yeah, you can do a lot of that over the phone and Zoom and all that, but I'm just surprised.
You could be absolutely right. And somebody may be willing to take the risk. I'm a bit risk averse in this class overall because I think as a class, 2023 is not as good as 2022, 2020. I think going back, I want to limit risk in this particular group.
Makes a lot of sense. And then you start looking at the rest of the guys. Blake Freeland is a guy that you could possibly be looking at if you don't pick a tackle early on. I think that could make a lot of sense, especially considering he went to BYU. Imagine that with Andy Reid. Kayshon Boutte is another one where you start looking at some of the guys that are down there. Boutte had a fantastic, he was a high profile player, I guess that's the best way to put it. But he didn't test very well. But the thing that another thing he has going for him is he's 20 years old. There's a couple of players in this draft that are extremely young that can be growing into their bodies and into getting into an NFL uniform.
And I know some of you out there are saying, Ryan, you have a flag for off-field concerns. Why didn't you use it on Boutte? And I will tell you that the honest truth is that corroboration is hard to find in Boutte's situation. The back and forth declaring, undeclaring, declaring, like the whole thing around him is shrouded in somewhat of a mystery. And until I have concrete details, I wasn't going to put that flag on him. So I let that ride with him as an average prospect without a red flag. If you guys disagree, please let us know in the comments. I do want to get a significant feedback from everyone about how they feel about where their favorite prospects are. I think favoritism is something maybe gets leaned on in this draft class a little bit more than average.
And I do want to say this really quick. I want to give a shout out to Mike Renner. I think he did a fantastic job getting this information out there. That's why I got the Keyshawn Boutte thing. Draft prospects will be 20 years old on draft day, and I do think this makes a little bit of a difference when you start looking at these guys. Anthony Richardson, Keandre Miller, Israel Abanikanda. Yeah. Keyshawn Boutte, Tuli Tuipulotu. Man, some of these names. Yeah. Christian Gonzalez and Kelly Ringo. And then you've got offensive prospects that will be 24 or older as rookies. Will Levis, Hernan Hooker, Eric Gray, Charlie Jones, A.T. Perry, Tank Dell, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Schoonamaker, Steve Avila, Cody Mock, Chandler Zavala, John Michael Schmitz, and then defensive prospects will be 24 or older. Will McDonald, Keon White, Yaya Diaby, Byron Young, Kobe Turner, Dayon Henley, and Marte Mapu. Or Mapu, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I apologize. The reason I point all this out, at some positions, age doesn't matter as much. Mm-hmm. But you start getting to the skill position players and your edge type players, which the first four and that defensive players that I named were edge players, that becomes a bigger issue.
It does. Explosiveness fades with age. We have to be real about that. The other thing that I'll point out is,
I was just going to say, some of these guys are first round picks, and you'd want a guy that's going to be there 8 years, and some of these guys aren't going to be able to play that long.
Yeah, and that's part of the risk as well. The one position that I think exists outside of that entire scenario is quarterback. Yep. And I do want to point out that I find it hilarious that everyone calls Hendon Hooker the old man of this draft class, and Will Levis is going to be 24 just like him. Yep. Are their birth dates the same? No, but nobody talks about Levis in that kind of key. Again, I don't think it matters for quarterback, and that's why I completely throw out that argument when it came to the quarterbacks in this class. But if I'm wrong and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis go in the first round, I'm ecstatic because that means two more prospects drop down to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yep. Yeah, and there's a lot of questions as to how many QBs are going to be going in the first round. And the other question is if Houston doesn't take a QB, where does C.J. Stroud go? Because the thought is that Bryce Young is going to be the number one pick.
Yep. Bryce has been at the top of the quarterback list for me since week 3 of last season. And I do update it weekly through the season. He is number 2 overall, just behind his teammate Will Anderson for me. So, I mean, kudos to Nick Saban. It's like he gets the best recruits and he does the best job with them. So I think that's something they can lean on too. Maybe you question some of the DBs, but certainly at quarterback and edge rush, I think I'm pretty comfortable.
Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thank you all for listening and watching. We do appreciate all the new everydayers we have and all of you that have been here for what is this 6-7 years that we've been doing this show. And there's going to be a ton of content coming this weekend. So please be on the lookout for that. We're going to be inundating everybody with content because this is our time of year where we have a lot of fun. I think we both enjoy covering the draft. Obviously, you're more into it than I am, but I love talking about it and I love watching it. So it's going to be a lot of fun in that regard.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. We would love to know your opinions on this draft board, especially if you go download it at NFL33.com. And it's not too late to grab the draft guide from Rogue APC. And that will give you background and context around a lot of these guys, give you their production, their athleticism combined with a ton of actual significant write-ups based on film only. And that's, I think, for Canty is somebody that you want to take a look at. So thank you for spending your time with us today. Matt Derrick will be back tomorrow. We will have streams for the draft. Lots coming for that. I will be on the ground in Kansas City. There will be an undisclosed environment until Wednesday night where I'll be. If anybody wants to come out and say hello, we'd love to see you. I don't know where that is yet, but we're going to figure that out, and I'll put it on social media, maybe even drop a little extra episode here. So we appreciate your time. It's almost here. It's getting closer every minute. Enjoy the NFL draft, and we'll be back with you tomorrow. Thanks for listening now. We'll talk to you then.